Friends, thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion. As much as we would all hope to not have to have a conversation about guiding children through grief, loss, and tragedy, we all know that the realities of this world mean that we have to be equipped for conversations like this. While the church certainly can extend thoughts and prayers to those who grieve, we are convinced that God has called His church to actively participate in the healing of this broken world. But how do we do that? How do we proactively extend the grace of God to this burdened and broken world? I'm Reverend Kayla Smith, the Associate Director of the Reach Hurting Kids Institute, and I'll be hosting our conversation today. I'm joined by some incredible leaders who are all passionate, gifted, wise, and relentless in pursuit of sharing God's love with the children of this world. This conversation is meant to equip you. We are here to offer some really good ideas from this incredible panel, some great ways for you to care for your church, your congregation, your children in their darkest moments. And with that, let me have our panelists introduce themselves. Welcome, friends.
Thank you. Hi, Kayla. I'm Dr. Julie Cooper. I've been working in children's ministry all of my adult life, but currently I lead an organization called Trauma Free World. And we are just committed to bringing awareness about the impact of trauma and trauma-informed training to everyone.
I'm Kim Botto. I've been a children's and student pastor for decades in the local church, and my passion is equipping churches to welcome every single child where they can belong, grow, and thrive, and so that the church can be a safe place for them to share their hard stories, be cared for, and care for others.
I'm Lori Crosby. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a registered play therapist and supervisor. I am also the Chief Inspiration Officer of Reach Hurting Kids Institute. I specialize in treating children who've experienced trauma, and I have been volunteering in children's ministry, I think since I was like 15 years old. Long time.
Qualified. I'm Beth Guckenberger. I'm the co-executive director of Back to Back Ministries. We're a ministry that works with orphaned and vulnerable children and their families all across the world. And I've been working in and through the church for the last 30 years as a children's pastor and senior pastor.
Incredible. Well, thank you all for joining us for this conversation. I'm so glad that each of you are here. So with that, let's just jump right in. As our team prepared for this conversation, we searched through social media to find the real questions that children's ministry leaders are asking about guiding kids through grief and loss, those big things that happen in our churches, heartbreaking stories. So this is one of those posts. This leader says, "I would love your prayers for our church family. One of our babies, a precious 3-year-old girl named Hattie, drowned in a family member's pool yesterday. We are all brokenhearted. She used to give me a hug every Sunday morning. Her parents are struggling with knowing how to go on after such a tragedy." So, Julie, let me ask you first, what do we do in a situation like this? Where do we even start?
Such a great question. And in your intro, you talked about being active participants. I think that action starts with just offering our presence. And when I think of this situation, we think of the family, of course. We think of friends. We think of this church ministry. We can come and be present to all of them. A couple of years ago, I was with a grieving mom just as she picked out the outfit for her daughter to be buried in. You know, you can't fix these hard situations. There's not necessarily the right words. And of course, the platitudes don't help, right? We're not coming out with our pat phrases like everything happens for a reason. It's our presence, just to be there and to know that if you need me, I'm here. Regardless, I just want to be a presence with you right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Julie, when I think about some people, especially at those ground zero moments, they'll be forever etched in their mind and they'll remember every word. For some people, they'll just have an impression of like what kind of was happening and who showed up in those moments. And I think it's part of our responsibility is just to be proximate and to get comfortable with being proximate to pain. And just to be honest, Kayla, that's not easy. Like for anyone listening, like it feels much more comfortable to either do something instead of be something, and to go away instead of to draw near. But when I think about really who Jesus is, I don't need to quote him in those moments. I just need to model him, and that's just to draw near to those places and leave the impression that he's with us. I think that's probably the most important impression we can leave, especially in the days around any crisis or tragedy, that God is with us, and that as you said in your intro, that we're healing agents, we're representatives of, we're just with them. That's a good guiding principle. More than a script I could memorize, just that principle of being with, I think, is probably the most important.
Yeah, that reminds me of a situation that came up for me in my first year of being a children's pastor. There was a tragic death of a father. He was found murdered, and the executive pastor and I were driving out to the children's house to be with them and their mother. And I was texting a mentor. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, and he offered just to be a non-anxious presence. Just to be there in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the anxiety, to represent Christ in a way that says, while everything else is crazy, I am with you. And this doesn't shake me because I am with you. But is there a point at which we need to get practical? Like we can say, there's something tangible that needs to be done here. Where do we find those things? How do we do those things? What do you think?
Well, when tragedy happens, there will be tangible things that the family needs. They're going to continue to need to eat meals. So they may need meals delivered. They may need fresh fruit and vegetables dropped off at their door. Also know that just approaching a family and saying, "What do you need?" They have just experienced unimaginable loss. They may not be able to list one single thing. So as a church community, what we can do is make suggestions. Hey, we want to provide meals for you every night this week. And then we'll reevaluate. We're going to put a cooler on your porch. People are going to drop it off at 6. Do you have any dietary requirements or any special food that you want? Also, we need to keep in mind that grief is a long process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I would say you grieve for
Lifetime.
My father died many years ago, and I'm still grieving his death.
There's no time limit.
So keep in mind that we need to continue to check in on them. A year later, two years later, in all the different seasons of life. And we recently had a mom in our community who passed away. And someone said something that I thought was brilliant. As we were all figuring out all the things we're going to do, she goes, "Wait a minute. Are we doing this to make us feel better? Are we doing this to meet a need for the family?" So I think thinking about, we're not doing it, as Beth, as you said, just our presence is enough. However, there are tangible needs, but make sure that we're not doing it just so we can check off a box and say, this is what they need. And I found in helping a friend who her husband didn't wake up one morning, and she had a 2, 4, 6, and 8-year-old. And as I sat with her just hours after her husband passed away, I asked, I think it was like from the Holy Spirit, I said, "So what are you afraid of? Like, what are you concerned about?" And she said, "How am I going to put 4 kids to bed by myself?" So we said, "Okay, how might we help you with that?" And we created a team tuck-in, and we would go over and tuck her kids in bed. So just sitting with the family, and not just once, but over a long period of time, because also their needs will change.
Yeah, their needs will change. And we need to be ready to hear that. It's so hard to hear as fixers, as doers, that maybe our fixing and doing needs to cool it, and we need to listen. Wow. Yeah, that's a great, great piece of advice. So let's take a look at another social media post. This is from a leader talking about suicide. So they say, a beautiful young 15-year-old girl in our community took her own life this week. She left behind her parents and 3 younger siblings, ages 4, 6, and 12. The family is looking for resources to help their children process the loss of their sister. So this is a pretty common question. I wish it weren't, but it is that we want to know what to tell parents when they ask for our advice. So Lori, let's start with you on this one. As a therapist, what guidance would you offer here?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much to say on this topic. But honestly, adults and parents who are going through their just imaginable pain and grief, when you're talking to your younger children, keeping it short and being very direct and honest as much as you can, being developmentally appropriate with what happened. Sometimes as adults, we find it really difficult to say words like they died or they're dead, but we need to use those hard words, saying things like they're at a better place now, they passed on, leaves, especially a child as young as 4 and 6, confused and expecting them to come back. Oh, what better place are they in? And when are they coming home?
We go there.
Yeah, and am I invited? I'm going to go too. Right. But really being able to say they've died, and that means that their body no longer works. They are not with us. They are never coming back. And
That's
just
so
keeping it
practical.
short.
Yeah, it's so practical in that, like, I think that most pastors would maybe attempt to soften and help it to be an easier process. But it sounds like you're saying it's much more beneficial to the children to say, this is what happened. They will not come back. Their body, I like how you said it, their body is not working anymore. Yeah.
And if you don't give them clear, direct information, children have magical thinking, especially for, even pushing to 6, and they will fill in the gaps with whatever their imagination tells them. So if they ask hard questions, or when they ask those hard questions, you're able to say, maybe I don't know yet. I need time to think about it to answer, but then give them those answers so that their magical thinking doesn't make the situation worse or cause more pain or more confusion.
Right.
But being short, direct, to the point, using the final words, dead, death, is really, really important.
Yeah. In my work with families, I noticed that parents and caregivers really struggle with this one feeling around conversations like that: inadequacy. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and we recently experienced the Covenant school shooting. So just briefly, like that was a private school, church-affiliated school, and 4 children and 2 teachers lost their life that day. And we gathered families in our church just to grieve together. And thankfully, none of our families were directly affected by that, but the anxiety that was built up by that situation just permeated our city. Families all across the city were talking about this. But as we talked together at those tables at our church, everyone expressed, like, how am I supposed to have this conversation with my child? How am I supposed to alleviate their anxiety about going to school tomorrow? So, I mean, what do we do to help alleviate some of that feeling of inadequacy? How do we do that?
Feelings of inadequacy, I find it really is prevalent. So it's almost normal to feel that way. But I think as the church, we can, coming back to the idea of proximity, we can remind our parents that you're a safe person for your child. And when an event like that happens, the number one thing that kids need is a feeling of safety. So rather than thinking, I have to have had special training to have this hard conversation with my kids, we can let them know what your child really wants to know is, am I safe? So entering into just that consistent caretaking, making sure that you pick up your family routine as much as you can, and offering them the opportunity to talk about it. How do you feel about this? Like, what do you want to talk about as a family? What would you do to help kids feel better? I think when you open up the avenue for kids to talk, you let them know it's normal, your feelings are normal, but you're safe now. We can all do that. You don't need initials behind your name to do that. So we can encourage our parents, this is a space you can step into.
I love that you said, just talking about like normalizing the emotion, like, and helping kids even label it, because maybe they don't even know anxiety or grief or sadness. And so like having a feelings wheel or a feelings chart to help them just verbalize that they're feeling maybe anxious to go to school. Because if you can, they say name it to tame it, right? So helping them verbalize the emotion and then just validating it. Like, it's okay to feel anxious to go to school tomorrow. Like, I understand that. And just being with them in that, being that safe presence that you were talking about.
Yeah. Say that again. What was that quick phrase?
Name it to tame it.
Name it to tame it. So naming the emotion so that we have some kind of handhold on what this is and I can handle this. Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I think also letting the child lead. You might have a 4-year-old who wants to talk about it for 30 seconds and then they want to. When my sister lost a baby, and as we told the kids, the 4-year-old said, okay, can I have Cheerios for breakfast? And that's okay. I think sometimes as adults, we think there are certain things that a kid has to go through, and it's not. So the important thing is to be present, to be available for them to listen. And when the child wants to quit talking about it, it's okay. Then our role is to leave that door open. And if we force them to talk too much, then guess what? Tomorrow when they're feeling these feelings, they're not going to want to talk to you, Beth, because they're afraid you're going to take it on way past the length of time that they want to talk about it.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of presence, a lot of awareness as the caregivers of children who've experienced trauma. We need to be even and engaged and ready. That feels like a lot to ask of caregivers sometimes, especially when they're navigating their own grief. But it's that important that we stay engaged, that we lean into what our kid may be needing. Yeah. Well, so far we've been talking about ways to support parents, supporting them directly and helping them as they help their kids. But as children's ministry leaders, we will often be having these conversations with kids themselves. So let's talk about ways we can minister to kids directly. Here is another post about that. We have a younger elementary child who is about to lose her mother to cancer. It's devastating for so many reasons. I'm not a therapist. I feel overwhelmed. So what am I supposed to say? Julie, you brought up earlier that we can kind of match that feeling of inadequacy with I don't have to have letters after my name in order to do this, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I think it's super important. And there's a time to know, right, when we want to have professionals ready to go. And I know within your ministries, you all have done that. Kim, within your ministry, who are some professionals that you can reach out to. So we can encourage parents to talk, but we also encourage parents to take advantage of the amazing training and heart that professionals have. That's okay. And it's a great resource.
Absolutely. In our ministry, we would talk to a variety of therapists and professionals and have a list for parents that they could look at. And it's really important to have a list because a therapist that works great for Julie might not be the best fit for me. So we give them a list. And also I have a stack of children's books on death and divorce and big things that a kid might encounter, that when a family is faced with tragedy, I can give them, I have that book. I don't have to wait to get it. I can give them that book. And also, we'll use those books to equip our children's ministry leaders. Read these books and it gives you language to talk to the kids. And when you were talking about use dead, use dying, so many people are afraid to do that, but these children's books can help you.
I think to answer your very specific question, speaking directly to that children's ministry leader, I think being curious about the child and saying, what are your questions right now? What do you need? Like we're all used to thinking to ourselves, well, I've seen this one other time and this was the kind of magic bullet for that other child. So I'm going to try to recreate that situation. But every child is different. Every story is different. And if someone's mother is dying but has not died, then one of your opportunities is to help prepare them for that and be able to help say, here's what's happening. I also think, I made this word up, this is not official, but I say that children's pastors, and really all pastors, are professional people dealer withers, so rely on those skills and those muscles you've built over a long period of time and and apply them in these stories. And I think one of the things, even before someone passes or after the tragedy happens, that we get to do is give permission. Like, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in where a parent says, my child wants to sleep in her bed, and I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. Like, it's a great idea. Or I was with a family whose baby was dying in a hospital, and it was very, very sad. And the mom had this like picture in her mind that she wanted to have a family picture, like the kind you hang in your wall with matching outfits, but they were sad and unshowered, and the baby looked sick, and she was like, I'm never gonna have that family picture. I'm like, yes, you can. We'll go get you matching outfits. We'll put you some makeup on. We'll bring in a professional photographer. And like, giving people permission in those moments where they feel kind of crippled by their pain and circumstances. I think that's a really practical role a children's pastor can play, is like, okay, how can I help make this bucket list moment happen if the mom is still dying, or this memory? Like, those are all just being curious. What do they need? What's their temperament and personality? And how can I help them in those moments get what they need?
There's like an honoring of the child in this that I'm hearing. I'm hearing us say, this is a disciple. And I can honor their dignity in this moment by knowing them and loving them as an individual, not as a circumstance. This is not a kid whose mom is dying of cancer. This is Stephen. This is Isabel. This is my friend, this co-disciple who I can walk this path with. I love that.
I think our communities are willing to do extraordinary things if we ask them. So like, I can think of a student I know whose grandmother was dying of a lung disease and needed like a bubble and protection and all the things to keep her safe. But the child really wanted that grandmother to see a last sporting event. And the amount of people that had to go to work to transport this grandmother and create an environment, it was like people were willing to do it. Because I think we're actually really willing. We just need a cheerleader or champion to say, this is going to happen, and I need 7 of these and 4 of these. And so sometimes as a children's pastor, you can play that role as the quarterback of an experience or an opportunity for them to make that happen.
So speaking directly to the child, Lori, let me ask you, if we're talking to a child whose mother is dying, what do we need to keep in mind in that conversation? How do we best provide that non-anxious presence for them?
Right. Well, I mean, I love what Beth shared as far as like being able to prep the child. Like, your mom is dying, and, you know, maybe with permission from the father, like, what can, you know, I think this is important to share, and then just walk that child through saying goodbye. We don't do death well culturally, specifically where we're at. And so how can we do death well? How can we honor those who are dying or those who died? And helping the child be able to say goodbye to their mother. And what would that look like? What does the child, like honoring the child's wish of saying goodbye, explaining it to them, and then helping make that happen, and being that non-anxious presence who can just be with, and then being the hands and feet of Christ, and making that happen for the child so that they can honor their parent. And just being able to help them label their emotions, validate the emotions. I mean, we can cry with them. I think that's really powerful. Like, just encouraging the family and the parents, like, you don't have to hide your grief. But there's something really powerful about grieving together and being together in just the tremendous amount of pain that is tragedy, trauma, grief, loss.
I think also really practically, recently I did a funeral together with someone for a woman who died and left behind 2 middle school children. And the father was thinking, all the speakers at this memorial service are going to be talking to the adults in the room, but the only people I really care about are my 2 kids and what they remember from this. So we actually had like a children's sermon in the middle of a memorial service that the rest of the people listened to, but it wasn't for them. It was actually just for the kids. And I think, you know, it's been about 2 years since that happened. And a couple of times in my follow-up conversations with their children, they remember being directly addressed in language that was appropriate for them, in language that expressed their experience, which was much different than the adults in the room who were grieving. So that's a really practical thing a children's pastor could do too.
Yeah, and there's a great, because I have done that too, and there's a passage about our bodies are like a tent, and they're temporary though. Kids get tents. Tents are fun for a certain period of time, and then they wear out or it gets too cold and there's no bathrooms in the tent. And I use that scripture a lot, and kids then understand, like when their mother passes away, she had a great body and it was super fun, but what she's got now is even better. So it's a way of using scripture. And I think, Beth, to your point, anytime you have children that have experienced the loss, it might not be the mom, it might be a grandmother, it might be an aunt or somebody who doesn't have any children but worked with kids. Specifically addressing the children in the service is so important.
Love that. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about when we need to call in the experts. We as pastors, we get the opportunity to lean in and pastorally counsel, but there has to be a moment at which we need to say, whoa, this is out of my depth. I'm not quite sure what to say. So what is that line? Beth, where do you find that line of when you need to call in an expert?
You know, I think some people who have had no experience with mental health professionals might think like, oh, this signals I can't take care of my kid myself, or this signals that Jesus isn't enough, and so I just want to first dispel that. I think what mental health professionals give us are tools, and those tools that maybe we learn in an hour a week get utilized every other hour of the whole rest of the week, and they equip us to be in the story in a really healthy way. And so if you think of it as a way to utilize, those experts have had training, they understand science, they have all this experience and knowledge that they're going to package in ways that we can then practice during the week. And so when I think about I want to have better practice, they're like in essence like coaches. I mean, mental health professionals are coaching us on how to regulate our emotions, or how to have difficult conversations, or how to process hard stories from our past, or so I think that as any kind of staff member of a church, we want to do our job as best as we can, and mental health professionals help give us tools to do that. And so recognizing what they can do, and also for us, I mean, I just want to say that for a minute to our mental health, to our children's pastors who are watching. When I take a deep dive into a family's pain, I, at the end of that story, can tell that I have been swimming in deep waters. I need someone to talk to me. I need someone to help answer my questions that maybe I thought I had settled, but this story kind of revived some of them again, or maybe either caused secondary grief or triggered or reminded me of my own primary griefs. So really understanding we need that to stay healthy and in the story too. And if we don't get what we need, we tend to avoid hard stories or to try to fix hard stories, but these are not stories to be fixed, they're stories to be healed.
Yes,
Yeah, if
absolutely.
I could share another thought that came to mind as we're talking about that, right? We know how important in children, the adult, the safe adult, we hope it's the parents, like, it is everything. It's everything in that story. And as I was just thinking, what we were talking about is we want to encourage parents, like, you can do this. You don't have to be a professional. You can enter into the story. You can help your kids talk about hard things. But I also think we have families whose parents have maybe had their own hard stories. Like, one of the things we know is that trauma is not the exception. Traumatic experiences are more the rule. Right. So it also could be extremely likely that a parent, because of their own hurts, their own past, they really feel like, I can't enter this story. I don't know how to. Or a children's worker. And like you said, it could be their own experience. Actually, they're making a wise move to kind of tap out of this and call on someone else to step into that, whether it's someone with more experience or a professional. And I think, again, as the church, we can say yes, and all of it. Like, the Lord ministers, he's ministering through families, he's ministering through scripture, he's ministering through professionals, and we want to help our families feel supported in whatever their journey looks like.
Yeah. So when we invite a therapist into the room, we're not kicking Jesus out of the room.
Exactly.
Right.
He sits with me in my room, in the room when I'm doing therapy. I can't do it apart from him. And like, just to encourage like the pastors too, I have had the churches in my area, like the leadership, the care pastors, come to my office and interview me before I get put on a referral list, like vetting, okay, am I a Christian? Do I actually believe? Do I know Jesus? Like, is he in my office? And absolutely, he's in my office with me. And so I love that. I invite that in as a mental health professional. I think churches should make sure they are vetting who they are referring their congregation to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, so speaking of mental health then, entering the conversation, let's take a look at another post. This is a pastor saying, I need some advice. The parent of one of the boys in our ministry passed away last summer. I know he has to be hurting, but he doesn't seem to be processing the loss. Should I try to get him to talk about it? So, Lori, let me ask you first then, as a counselor, as a therapist, would you advise that we lean in and try to get this child to talk about this loss?
I think most importantly, maybe they're not processing, with you, the pastor, but maybe with somebody else. But it's so important to just be curious and be that open, safe presence if he chooses to speak with you. But you could ask open-ended questions, just, hey,
Yeah.
I was thinking about your parent. I was thinking about you.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're doing.
So curiosity can look like direct questions to the child then. What else could curiosity look like?
Well, I think these hard conversations happen best in the context of relationship. And sometimes, especially if we're fixers and doers, we want to go, okay, I'm going to meet with this kid for 10 minutes. I'm going to start with this question. The best thing to do might be going after ice cream with the kid or going and shooting hoops. And also, as somebody who's been on staff for a long time at a church, sometimes I am not the best person to have that conversation with the child or the teen. So what I like to do is look for somebody that they already have an established relationship with and come alongside that volunteer. And I don't mean be in the conversations, but just encourage them, pray for them, give them a gift card so they can go, play putt-putt golf. Yeah. But too often we want to get right to the chase. And really, as we establish the relationship, that's how things are going to come out. I mean, you do play therapy, Lori, and it's because as they play, well, you tell us, why do you do play therapy?
Play is the language of children. And so to do therapy effectively, you need to speak their language. So getting on the floor and being with them and joining them in play when you're invited is a really powerful healing tool because you're speaking their language.
And I wouldn't be confused by someone's chronological age or body size and think like, okay, they're 15, so really we should be sitting at a desk across from each other for 50 minutes. Even if someone is biologically 15 years old, they developmentally might be a fraction of that. And so the way that you might be looking at that 15-year-old, like they're not processing, well, maybe they are, but more in a way that you're talking about through play. And so I think curiosity looks like being more interested in the person than you are this particular chapter of their story. Because in the work that we do with orphan and vulnerable children, maybe I'm trying to process the most recent loss in their life, but that might not even feel like their primary loss. Or maybe it needs to get in line because I'm actually still overwhelmed by another story that happened a few years ago. And I can't even metabolize what's happening now because I'm still back there. And so I think curiosity means I'm actually more interested in you as a child and in your ecosystem. Like sometimes as youth pastors or children's pastors, and we see the kids isolated from their families or their friends or whatever, we don't get the whole picture. So curiosity can also look like trying to understand who their friends are, what are those voices saying and doing, and how are they processing with those friends, or what's the family unit look like, and just trying to take a step back and saying, this is going to be a really long story, so I need to get the lay of the land and make sure that they know I'm part of that ecosystem. I'm not the answer to your current problem.
I love how you're calling it the ecosystem, because it all plays into each other. There's no one thing isolated from another. Everything's a reaction to the rest. Wow.
In such wisdom, just I want to highlight again, the relationship piece is so important, right? It would be intrusive to bring up a tragedy with a child I don't have a relationship with. But the truth is they probably are still hurting. And to not acknowledge that that's not a huge part of their story would be silly. But in relationship, otherwise you don't have a voice in that child's life, really.
You don't have permission there.
That's right.
That's a good
And
point.
I think as a staff person, though, sometimes we think it's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to make sure that the child gets the care that they need. And we might not be the one directly doing it. And I also believe that that's part of spreading the joy of ministry. Because even though it may seem hard at first, if you get to be the safe person in a kid's life where they open up to you about what's going on, I want all of my volunteers to experience that.
I love that. So what about when kids have big theological questions that come up in the midst of a huge loss? One pastor wrote, one of the students in our ministry tragically experienced the death of her closest friend this weekend. How do I walk her through this journey when her heart hurts and she starts questioning God's plan? So I'm going to throw this to you, pastors. What do you think? Where do we start when we've got big theological questions that start to come up?
I mean, the verse I love to go to is 1 Corinthians 13:12. And I'll paraphrase, but we're looking through a foggy mirror right now. We're not going to fully see it. One day, when we are face to face with Jesus, we will understand it, but right now we don't. So sometimes I will take a kid actually into the bathroom, not alone, or get a mirror and blow on it and go, see, we can kind of see, like we know that this person has just died, but as far as, I don't know why, and it is okay to say, I don't know, and then focus on what we do know. God is there with us. God wants to comfort us. God created us to live in community, and this community is here to support you. Too often as adults, I think we want to come up with some profound answer, and there are hurts that happen in this world that there is no answer for.
Yeah, I lived out of the country as a missionary for 15 years, and so I had a large sampling of prodigals that got sent to me over those 15 years, like people who thought it would be a good idea for you to go to a mission trip with those missionaries. And this is just my own observations, but after so many years with prodigals, one of the through lines I often heard was, all the adults in my life seem to have it figured out. It doesn't make sense to me, and so it just must not be for me. Because adults, we have this impression we're supposed to let them know, like, God is good all the time, God is good, and that we're satisfied with all the answers we've been given, so that you think the Christian life is rainbows and unicorns and the best life to live. And while there's some traces of truth in that sentiment, and I don't fault parents for wanting the unintended consequences when a kid has a hard question, they're like, I mean, there's no place for that inside faith, therefore I will reject faith. And I think one of the biggest things we can do is say, hey, my question might not be your question, but I got questions too. And you may get this question answered to a certain satisfaction, but that doesn't mean it's going to actually go away. Like, there are some things on this side we may not know in a way that ever feels good to us. And figuring out how to get comfortable with Jesus with our questions instead of needing Jesus for all of our answers, I think that's a really, that's a gift we can give them that they'll take long after that particular crisis season is going on. And just even like for me, certainly not in Ground Zero or even the metaphorical first 100 days, but this is being filmed in January, and I just spent the holidays with two 15-year-olds who lost their mother a couple of years ago. And so they're a little bit past that like initial shock of it all, but it's still fresh enough. It's that they have new episodes of grief. And we were talking, I mentioned their mom a few times in natural conversation, like, she would have loved this gift, or you laugh like her. And after the holidays, one of them said to me, people are afraid to talk about her in front of us. They're afraid to bring her up because they don't want to make us sad, or they're afraid to bring her up because they're afraid they're going to say it wrong and we'll be mad. And so what happens is nobody ever brings her up. And I think that's another like just very practical thing that we can do is ask about the question 2 years from now, because they think like, you know, by now I'm supposed to have had that, I'm supposed to be okay with whatever it was. But like, well, I'm not afraid of your questions. I'm not afraid of her name. I'm not afraid of your emotions.
Jesus is not afraid of our questions.
No, he asks questions all the time.
Right. Jesus answered just about every question with a question. And I'm thinking of Jesus' patience and kindness to Thomas, who had big questions about, I just don't know that I can see that it's real. Resurrection can't be real. And instead of Jesus meeting with Thomas with like a backhand and a, come on, you're supposed to know, it's met with just such grace, because that's who our God is. Yeah, so when we face these theological questions, I'm hearing you say that us as the grown-ups saying, I don't know, or I struggle in this way, is so much more powerful than any kind of profound statement that we could dig deep and create.
And I want to clarify something I said as far as we can focus on God's truth. There is a time for that, but as the kid is initially grieving, that's not the time to start quoting Bible verses. As you said, Beth, that's the time to sit with them and grieve and just say, I don't know either. And it's okay to cry. Because what we can do is model to them what grief looks like.
Be angry.
Yeah, we could, yes, like,
Hold up a pillow, let them punch it.
yes, great idea.
Well, and it tells another biblical truth too, that God's presence is with us in our grief, in our loss, in our anger. God's presence is with us. So I don't want us to feel that as pastors, we're missing it if we don't jump in with a very deep theological truth right now. We are jumping in with a deep theological truth, the deep theological truth that God is Emmanuel. God chose to be with us, which is really, really profound.
I think also to highlight something Kim said, I've been influenced a lot by the rabbinic way of teaching. And there's an expression in Israel that says, a teaching without a story is like a basket without a handle. It's too hard to pick up. And so her example of the mirror, I think figuring out ways to package those theological truths in something other than word study, will be really helpful for kids. But at the same time, my warning is, I have a friend who has a serious jaw issue, and she always jokes that everybody tells her about their cavities, like if making sure that a story isn't like, I know how you feel about your mom, because one time my best friend, the dog died, and the dog is a very painful death, but it's like not needing to have a story about your story. Like that feels kind of 101, but I just want to say it clearly. We aren't going to compare grief or try to act like I understand your grief because I've been grieving too. Your grief is your grief, and I'm trying to understand your grief. I don't need you to know about mine in that moment. So, but still having, I think that's the story idea is a powerful way that eventually you can put those truths together.
So sometimes we're wrestling with an individual child or family's loss, but sometimes a loss impacts a whole community, a whole congregation, a whole city. So what do we do in those moments when tragedy just kind of echoes throughout a community? Here's a question that came up in social media posts. So what do you guys do in terms of talking about death and grief and accidents? There was a horrific accident this past weekend where 15 young hockey players were killed, many of them from our area, and our kids and community are grieving the loss. This is a new experience for me, and I just want to be prepared for some of the questions I'm sure that I will get on Sunday. So Julie, where do we start when it's a communal tragedy?
Yeah, well, we know that although every person will have a unique experience, that communal losses benefit from communal grieving and healing processes. So coming together as a community to remember, to honor. I mean, you see often at the site where someone died,
Right. The
people bring
flowers
flowers.
or-
Like, I may not have known this person, but this is my community. I'm affected, and I want to have a part in it. Things like supporting the charities who support those who are affected by the communities. This community sense of healing, it really aligns with the way that God has created us to be in community and to care with all those who are about us, and the church can be central in that.
Ah, I love that. It's like the church is made for that.
That's right.
We're made for those communal celebrations, communal grieving, and all of that. Yeah. Yeah. So, what's a tangible way that we could lean into something like a communal celebration, communal grieving? What's something that you feel that the church could do to kind of inspire that communal processing of an event like that?
In a really practical way, open the doors. Maybe you don't normally aren't open on a Tuesday night, but like practically create a space that people can gather in. I think that's a really practical way. I also think we're not that great as a capital C church in teaching how to lament. And there's a certain kind of lament, that a cry of lament when 15 young people die in a tragedy. What we need in that moment is just to say together, this is unspeakably hard, and this is never going to be easy, and this is something we'll remember before they died, and we will remember after they died, and this will mark part of our timeline. And like just teaching that, and I mean, again, in the most practical way I can say, Psalms is the songbook of the church. That's what it was created for. So finding Psalms or modern day Psalms that help give language to people who don't yet have the words to say, why?
Yeah.
And
So that's such a good point. To lean into the resource that the church already is in scripture and in our rhythms. And you are so right that we need to get better at our rhythms of learning to grieve, learning to lament. Luckily, it's right there in the middle of the Psalms. We need to learn how to lament.
And I think when we open our church, we open it to the family, the kids, the students all together, and we grieve together as a family. And I've talked to a lot of children's and student pastors who then they're like, okay, so this Sunday I'm gonna do this thing just with the kids. That is really our role, is to equip the parents for that. There might be kids, and how do you decide whether it's a tragedy that warrants talking about with the kids or not? Because some kids might not be aware, and we don't want to be the deliverer of that news. We want them to hear that in the context of the people that they're closest to, which is their parents. So yes, I love what you said, Beth. Open your doors
and feed them.
Feed them.
And like feed. Food is a big.
Food goes a long way, for
Yeah,
sure.
breaking bread and even realizing the commonality. Like there's a lot of ways we naturally divide ourselves by class, by color, by gender, by generation. I mean, I have my daughter and her husband work during the day in very different environments. He's a wealth manager and she is a social worker in a very underserved community. But they laugh about how at night they have the same stories. People are still worried about the same things: their children, their marriage, their bodies, their parents. It's regardless of the environments that these stories play themselves out in, we are all at the end of the day very human. And so the church is a beautiful place that we can remind each other of that commonality, and we can come together in ways that the world continues to try to divide us in.
Wow. Yeah. So what about when a loss is specific to a children's ministry? Here's a pastor that was needing some advice. Does anyone have experience with the death of a child in your ministry? Wednesday night, a 10-year-old who was involved in our preteen ministry was killed in a car accident. Tonight is our bi-monthly preteen ministry, and we have to tell the kids. Just looking for any insight or advice. So what do we do in a situation where this is going to affect the children of our ministry? What do we say?
I think being, again, just honest, open, holding space, being direct and telling them, and then holding space for the communal grieving process would be really powerful. Giving parents a heads up so that they know.
Giving parents a heads up. Yeah, guardians need a heads up that conversation's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
Good point.
I think, and you said, we have to tell them. I don't know that we do have to tell them. You may have children there who are there for the first time or children who don't know that child. So you need to decide in the context of your church what's important. But if we are going to be talking about a child passing away with young elementary or preschool students, talk to the parents, but really weigh whether or not we really have to do it, or if we need to be equipping the parents to do it, or maybe even having a special thing outside of our normal time where we can invite parents to come in with their children and we can honor the child that was lost. We can care for the family who lost their child.
Right.
But too often we take this burden on us that, oh, I need to be the deliverer of the news, I need to help them process. Not always. Actually, often it's not that. We want to equip and empower the parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But knowing that a lot of the kids may come knowing, it could be smart to have not plan A, plan B, plan C, but extra staff on hand, knowing what to do with the kids who may have been the very close friends, as well as knowing how to care for the kids who are coming for the first time. Like, have extra hands, like make sure as a team you've talked about if we need to do some dividing out, like let's have a plan. Very often, we've talked about the non-anxious presence, right? We, as the adults, we need to have our emotions in check because the kids, they take their lead from us. So being ready, talking about what to do, I think would be pretty wise in that situation, yeah.
And Julie, you could probably talk to this better than I could, Julie, but like I think about even choices. If news gets out in that way, some kids are going to cry because maybe it reminds them, maybe they are close to that child and they're sad, or it reminds them of their grandparent that just died or whatever. Like some people are going to cry. Some children might feel bad or guilty because they're not crying. I would think that having choices of what kids can do in the aftermath of that, like some of them might want to go in the gym and play, and some of them might want to sit with an adult. Somehow choice, I think, needs to play a big role in it. But I'm with Kim. I'm not sure you should deliver that news without parental understanding, because they know everything that might trigger in that child that we have no idea about. We just see them twice a week or at best.
Well, and I think too of the relationship that we've talked about already, that we don't have necessarily the permission in that child's life to bring something up that's so heavy, so weighty, unless we've built a deep relationship with them. So maybe even equipping our small group leaders at a time like this would be ideal, like segmenting out into different groups or giving choice on how to respond, maybe even giving choice on whether or not this is a topic that this group is ready for. And who would know that better than the small group leader of that group? Yeah.
This is a plug for training, but the time to do that training is not when the crisis happens.
Absolutely.
The time to do that training
Yes.
is when the crisis is not, so that they're ready, because this happened on Wednesday and now we're meeting on Sunday or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so to that point too, when tragedy happens and kids are ready to process that with a small group leader or with a friend they trust, or maybe a leader that's a volunteer in your ministry that they just gravitate towards, sometimes we almost want to evaluate that loss and decide, is this a tragedy? Is it not a tragedy? Does this bear a heavy response, or is this just something we can shrug off? What do we do when a kid comes to us and says how devastated they are that their cat died over the weekend, when you know that the kid sitting next to them is losing their uncle to cancer? How do you, is there a place for measuring out, like, that's a tragedy, that one's not? What do we do with that?
Especially in the world of children, I think the differences between loss are smaller than they are for adults. I actually think a child who's lost a parent can probably minister in a really sweet way to a child who has just lost a pet. But for children, it could be their best friend moved away. Like there's a lot of losses that kids have. Even with some of the kids I've even worked with, like going from one building to another building, having siblings who move out of their school buildings, like they have a lot of losses that are 100% real to them, and we need to treat them all as 100% real. I think it's the adults who do more of the putting things in a pecking order than kids do, and they're experiencing a really tremendous loss. We want to, like, all the same things: presence, understanding, give them an opportunity to talk if they would like. All the same things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to take the pressure off of the ministry leaders. You don't have to determine whether or not it's a big loss or a little loss. It's grief. Let the child lead. I love what you said, Julie, as far as the child who just lost their parent may be able to care for the kid who just lost their goldfish in a way that we can't. So let's not rob that kid. And what we don't want to do is, if a kid is, I bring up goldfish because we had a child that just cried and cried and cried about their goldfish. It's not our role to say,
It's just a
that's not-
goldfish.
Yeah.
No.
And you don't know how the loss of that goldfish, Beth, you were talking about previous losses, that may be triggering all kinds of other losses that they've had. So we don't need to measure it. Let the kids talk. Let the kids take care of each other. Don't worry about a kid that in your mind has experienced a bigger loss that they might think, oh, why is he talking about the goldfish?
Yeah, I love how you said to minister to, that we can not just like hope that kids will, but we can expect that God has given them the tools. We can honor them in that way to say, God has really given them a gift to be able to minister to someone else in this group. I love that.
And just to follow up on what you guys were saying is we want to create an environment in our children's ministries, within our small groups, where kids regularly feel safe enough to talk about the hard things that happen in their life. And so having your small group leaders trained to know how to do a check-in procedure and being able to check in weekly with the kids, like even something as simple as a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like, can you just share this week? Like, what was a thumbs up that happened? What was a thumbs down? So that there is a natural rhythm within our ministries where we talk about really hard things. So it's not this one hard thing just happened and now kids are like, wait, what? What's happening? But where there is just that, this is what we do. This is what we do here. We talk about the good things and we are absolutely present in the hard things.
Yeah, keeping it simple too, with like a thumbs up, thumbs down, helps the kids who don't really want to say a lot. I love that. Okay, so what final thoughts do we have before we finish up?
Well, I love what Beth touched on is the time for training is not when the crisis happens. Your people need to be trained and equipped. So good intentions are really not enough. You have to do training. And there is, between all of us, just a plethora of outstanding trainings that you can get your team to participate in so they can be prepared and equipped to handle trauma, tragedy, loss, grief, all of it. And knowing that also, bottom line, like relationship is the trauma-informed strategy. Nothing goes forward if there is not an actual genuine relationship with the family or the child. Relationship is key.
Absolutely. Any other last thoughts before we finish?
I think sometimes we make it too complicated. There are many, many great resources, and I utilize resources from all three of you all the time. And being curious, closing our mouth and just listening for clues, just being present with a child, that accomplishes a ton.
This is, it's been said already, but we say a lot in my organization that it's not enough to be consciously compassionate, that we need to be competently compassionate. And in this space, honestly, like I see those who are maybe too intrusive or bringing things up without relationship, but more often I see adults shy away from grief and loss because we're uncomfortable. We don't know if we're going to re-traumatize a child by talking about it. Like, we just don't know. So training can help fill in some of those gaps to make sure that we realize that these children have real feelings, and they're at a time in life where when things happen and they're applying their thoughts of God to the things that are happening, like it's a great time to be able to answer and interact in a way that acknowledges hurt and still glorifies God. And the church can do it, and we can do that.
Yes. The church should be the safest place to share our hard stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think my last thought, I just echo all the training. Our organization, Back to Back, uses Trauma Free Worlds training, and we train people all around the world with it. But I also think, just to that children's minister that's listening, make sure you have people in your life that are listening to you. Make sure that you have someone that is caring about your temperature, your symptoms, your check engine light. Make sure that you have someone in your life. And if you can feel supported, then you can stay in the game longer. And you don't want any secondary tragedy where somehow one of these really hard things just knocked you out of ministry because it just became too much. Like, we want you in these stories as long as possible. So make sure you have people around you.
Friends, thank you again for this conversation. And for you at home, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We are going to provide resources for you at reachhurtingkids.com/grief. We want to provide links to Back to Back's website, for Trauma Free World's website, for the Reach Hurting Kids workshop, where you can train your team on providing this kind of care in your church. We hope to provide a script or outline for a funeral for a child. We want to provide links to the books that Kim referenced on how we can train up our families and give our kids resources so they can start to process their grief and loss. We are praying for you and your ministry as you do the hard work of being the non-anxious presence of Christ in the midst of a family's tragedy. Blessings on you.